objection to the, in order to make the conversation going, maybe it's an ignorant objection, but it's in my estimations, it's a special pleading logical fallacy. Because usually people don't apply the same difficulties they apply to some physical reality to God. They usually confuse, they apply their religious definitions into the equation just because they reply with the necessary being replies to some kind of religious definition. They insert that is a justification for God being the necessary being. Although when it comes to the world, they apply some kind of cosmological, explanations and difficulties and all this kind of stuff. So in my estimation, they are.
Well, you know that the what is it called? It doesn't actually. The big conjunctive contingent fact doesn't actually have to have a singular necessary explanation. You can actually have an infinite number of necessary explanations.
For example, in the classical formulation of the contingency argument, they say something like, it could not have been any other way. But if you see the probability of some kind of God being, if you see this probability of this being could not have been any other way, that doesn't make sense, because God has very complex qualities, character, and specific, all these kinds of specific stuff that is not probable to be to be inevitable, in a sense. So it's.
I don't know. I mean, it just seems. Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that, but it just seems like the discussion is like all over the place. I don't know whether you're critiquing the idea of like conjunctive facts. Okay, well, conjunctive facts can have explanation, but there could be like more than one. Oh no, hey, God could be otherwise. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you guys just settle on objections.
Yes, the God's simplicity. Yeah. This is what I'm attacking. In other words, I'm saying, is it truly probable in a cosmological sense?
Yeah, but the cosmological argument doesn't say that God is simple. That's like a different argument.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. In other words, we see this special pleading when it comes to the universe. They say how how is it possible the universe, something always existed? But when it comes to God, who is more complex in a cosmological sense, if you don't apply the religious definition, something that can do everything and has specific character, how is that probable to always exist inevitably?
But Socrates, I think you need to like attack a specific argument if you're going to say there's special pleading. You attack a specific maybe formulation of the argument, or yes, point to somebody who's been defending it and committed a special pleading fallacy. Just because something is true of a particular category and not of another category, that doesn't necessarily mean it's special pleading. You need to have reasons for why you're making an exception or why there's a difference. If you don't, and it's just arbitrary, then that would seem to be special pleading. But then in order for us to know whether the special pleading, charge applies, we're going to need to know what argument you're referring to and what specific premises and how the premises, how they're being defended and stuff like that.
Yes, of course. Yes, I understand what you said, sir. I am attacking specifically the term, it could not have been any other way. And I make a direct question. Could Allah have been any other way?
Yeah, I see. I'm not sure what that means. Like, it could not have been any other way. It's I'm not trying to be pedantic. I'm just saying that different people mean different things by that. So I think that language is not very helpful.
Yes.
I don't think.
What was the paradox of the necessity argument? I heard someone say it was a paradox.
Oh, it was just referring to like set theoretic concerns that come with when you talk about a big conjunctive contingent facts and stuff like that, and yeah, so it's just about like the Cantorian set theoretic paradoxes and stuff.
Okay, well, I don't know too much about that, so I couldn't say anything until I know.
Why we don't regard when we want to imagine something always exists and being inevitable, the first thing that comes in our mind is nothing. So it's not difficult to imagine nothing always existed inevitably and could not have been any other way. But then the next logical step after nothing, after the philosophical nothing, that we all agree, that I agree never existed, the next inevitable step is something like the cosmological nothing, not the most complicated being imaginable. What I've noticed is that people who in a sense insert their theological definitions, just because my theology says that God is simple and it fits with what my theology says, that means it's probable. But now we see two different standards, because in one case we investigate things with probabilities in the real world and in philosophy, and in the other case we just insert God like because our theological definitions fit with the
but not really. First of all, here we don't hold to divine simplicity, but I mean, like, even those who do, it's not like just arbitrary. It's not like they just say that because we have a theological commitment, therefore it's that. But we don't hold to what's it called, divine simplicity. But I guess what you want to say is that how come it is the case that the complexity. Hey Jake, what's up? Can you mute? There's a lot of background noise coming from you. So, somebody mute Jake, guys.
You don't like the random noise?
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so I guess what you want to say is that so we see like complexity in the universe and stuff, and if we say that the universe has to have an explanation because it's conceivable, like it's just logically conceivable that it could have been otherwise, right? You can describe it in different ways, and I mean, it always depends on what you mean by that, but. And you're saying the same applies to God. Well, hey, it's conceivable that God could have been like, let's say, not good or whatever properties God has. I mean, if that's all the person is saying, that like you could just logically conceive of the entity being described differently, therefore it has an external explanation, then yes, that should apply to God. But I'm not sure that's like that's what anybody's really saying. It could have been otherwise in the sense that it is contingent, and it's going to depend on what you regard as contingent or not. So if it could have failed to exist, or it could have been otherwise, then it is contingent, right?
Yeah.
And if it could not have failed to exist, or if it could not have been false or whatever, if it's true in every possible world, if it exists in every possible world, then it is necessary.
Yes, but what I feel is that that also reflects the theological position, not a real cosmological probability.
What do you mean? What do you mean by cosmological probability?
Because when we are to investigate whether something is probable to always exist inevitably, we need to apply some kind of secular logic and think.
But brother, this is not about probability. We're not making like a probabilistic argument here. This is not.
But yet that is
I'm not sure where the probability is coming in.
So this is the distinction of ontology with cosmology. So it's.
And I'm not sure. So do you mean that cosmology is like the science, like the study of like the cosmology, versus like ontology as in like the philosophy, or what exactly?
No, because with my simple mind, I thought to myself, okay, the contingency argument is a cosmological argument. So it refers to real things. So when you say infinite regress, you are applying to cosmological things. And you make good arguments, like the Grim Reaper argument, for example. Okay, so that is cosmology. And suddenly, when it comes to God, we jump to ontology, and even worse, we apply theological definitions that don't even address philosophy. We just apply like a special pleading, like a magic art. When in fact, if you think it logically, for example, the Islamic God could have been eternal times, something different. It's not inevitable in any secular logic.
Yeah, so you talked about like a Grim Reaper paradoxes and stuff like that. So it depends on. So you're saying basically we apply that to the cosmos, right? But then why don't we apply it to God? Now,
Yeah.
you tell me why it should be applicable. So what is the common factor here between the two that basically makes them both basically susceptible to the Grim Reaper charge, right? Because what you need is an infinite amount of time, or an infinite infinite. You need an infinite platform, and you need like to make use of some form of like patchwork principle or something, and put agents there and apply a super task to bring forward this contradiction that results from the Grim Reaper paradox. And what that is trying to show is that, well, I guess if you take the causal finitist solution, it's that any causal series just has a finite number of members. Now, how does that specifically apply to God? How would you apply that paradox to God?
With all due respect, sir, you just described this kind of special pleading. So, in one case, we need to investigate. First of all, we all agree that what always exists, the origins, is a very difficult question. So we all agree with the difficulty. What I've noticed is that although you think very elaborately to find solutions, to find the difficulties when it comes to a physical reality and to the universe, let's say, you don't apply the same standards to God, because if God doesn't just exist in our minds, in other words, it's not just an idea, he must exist in some kind of reality. But when you say...
Yeah, but that's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, what is it that I'm applying to reality that I'm not applying to another reality in a special pleading sort of way? So I told you what we need in order to run a Grim Reaper's scenario, right? And I asked you whether we can run that when it comes to the existence of God. So do you have these things? If you do, and maybe on certain models of God you do, and you can. In fact, I mean, Jake was talking about this to us maybe a while back when we were discussing this about a specific model of God, the Timean model, and he was saying, well, hey, maybe when it comes to the perpetual creation idea, he was saying maybe we could apply the same paradox would apply. So it's like we discussed that, like, hey, maybe the paradox could apply to this specific understanding of God. So, but then you can't just say just any understanding of God is gonna fall prey to the same kind of objection. You need to say that, oh, this specific conception of God should be basically susceptible to the same weakness for such and such reasons. You can't just it's just what you're saying is just very vague in general.
I agree. So my first is the complexity issue of God, and then is the purposefully nature of God. So when we see something is purposeful, you know the classical theist argument, where somebody walks in the beach and sees a clock, and he immediately understands that this clock has some kind of purpose. This kind of purposeful description applies also to God. So when we are to imagine something always existing inevitably, the first purpose is not favor to this assumption. Also, complexity is not favor to this assumption. For example, the same way...
What do you mean? I don't understand. Can you explain? Just focus on the purpose part, because I don't understand what you mean about that. Like, what do you mean that purpose?
Yes, I'm trying to... let's go first to complexity. Okay, the same way we don't think an iPhone always existed. Why we don't think an iPhone always existed inevitably? Because it's complicated. It's got parts, it's got a specific function, so it doesn't make sense an iPhone always existed.
Well, I don't agree with that, by the way. I don't agree with that. So I would be inconsistent if I
Yeah, we
told
don't
you
make that argument. We don't make that argument.
So if I said that any kind of complexity, in the sense that any kind of distinctions, conceptual, like, real, however you want to describe it, any kinds of distinctions in the way you're describing an entity entails that it is contingent, it couldn't have, always existed, whatever, and that I have any kind of complexity in God, and I don't apply that principle, then I'd be inconsistent. But I don't do that. And somebody who holds to divine simplicity is also not like inconsistent in this point, because they're saying that complexity implies that it's contingent or whatever, and they're saying that, well, God is simple, right? So I don't hold to divine simplicity, so I don't accept that principle.
Yeah, but not only that, you're moving to a different point. You're moving to another argument. You're talking about the design argument when initially you made the claim that we are guilty of special pleading based on causal finitism and the Grim Reaper paradox and applying it to God. And you've been asked several times now to make an analogy between that and what we say about God. You haven't done so. Now you've moved on to another argument. So go back to your original claim and show us how you have an analogous argument of a Grim Reaper paradox that can apply to our conception of God.
Hold on, Jake. Can I ask you a question?
How God breaks the Grim Reaper paradox?
Hold on. Jake, do you take to the doctrine of divine simplicity?
No, I do not.
Okay, good. Okay, I thought I heard you. For some reason, I thought so.
No, hell no.
Yes, because
Yeah, you haven't been listening to me very long, then, because I frequently argue against divine simplicity. So, anyway,
that's why I was weirded out by it specifically.
no, I don't hold to divine simplicity. So,
yes,
Socrates, you need to, unless you want to take back your original claim, you have to draw a proper analogy to show that the argument of causal finitism or the Grim Reaper paradox can be applied to our conception of God. If you can't do that, then you need to retract that claim.
Of course. I understand what you said, sir. First of all, very fast, I would like to address something, because now you said that you don't agree with divine simplicity, because Abdul Rahman said that God is simple, because I gave a
No. Well, I never.
No, incorrect, brother. Come on, we know each other. He doesn't believe in divine simplicity. In fact, I don't know of anybody on the stage that does, other than maybe Emmanuel. I have no idea about his position. He's a Christian. But the Muslims here, we do not affirm divine simplicity. It's a deviant, heretical position.
How can God justify all these kind of qualities? He's got all these kind of convenient qualities without some kind of essence to support these qualities. And does that plays any role to the probability God being the inevitable, being the necessary being?
But Socrates, remember what I told you earlier?
That has nothing to do with causal finitism. Yeah. Listen, do you know what the Grim Reaper paradox argument actually is? Because Abdul Rahman explained it to you, and you're claiming that it can be applicable to our conception of God, and you're jumping all over the place from different objections without actually substantiating that claim.
Let me address directly this point. With all due respect, sir, I don't care about your theological definitions. When we are investigating an argument, we need to investigate probabilities in a philosophical or cosmological sense, in a real sense. Whether the necessary being fits with your theological definitions plays no role, and there is where I detect the special pleading logical fallacy. In one case, when it comes to the universe,
but how can you do that? Sorry. Just on this point, look. So you're saying that there's special pleading because we don't apply the same principles to God, right? Now, so I'm taking your objection seriously, and I'm telling you, okay, here's a specific thing we apply to the contingent world and to the world in general, which is like, you talked about causal finitism and Grim Reaper paradoxes, and the reason we apply it to the world is A, B, C. I gave you the reasons and how it's applied. And I said, okay, now, does this apply to everything? Like in any scenario? No, one second, just let me finish. Does this apply to everything? Like, does it apply to any scenario? No. It applies to specific conditions, a specific kind of existence. Now there's the question of whether it should apply to God, and we're just special pleading and saying it doesn't. Now, how do you want to make that case without analyzing what God is, without analyzing these concepts, without looking at, what understanding of, God's relation to time and God's relation to the universe, to creation that we have? You can't just make that blanket statement without going into our theology and how we do how we understand God and why we don't apply the same principle to that realm. So I mean, unless you just want to make the blanket statement and just be vague, you're going to need to do a bit more than that.
Okay, and I understand what you said, but I insist because, as I said, this is where I detect the special pleading, that you apply theological definitions in the argument. In other words, to solve the argument. Let me be more direct. Okay, God supposedly breaks the Grim Reaper paradox. How is consciousness probable to break this paradox when in fact consciousness, everything we can imagine of consciousness is casual. First we decide first we act and then we decide. What I'm trying to say is that
what does consciousness have to do with causal finitism? I mean, it doesn't matter what cause you put there. You could put it we could put agent causation or deterministic, non-deterministic, whatever it is. I mean, what role does consciousness play here? I just don't get it.
What I'm investigating, sir, is how God doesn't apply to. So what I'm doing is I'm investigating God. What I'm doing is exactly what you gentlemen are not doing. I'm applying God the same way I'm applying to the problem to the universe. I'm applying the same problem to God. Okay, and I'm wondering now how consciousness goes around this problem.
No, you're asking the question. You need to make an argument. You're making the claim that a conscious being is susceptible to the same idea of the Grim Reaper paradox, but you're not actually demonstrating it. You're not actually setting up the analogy properly. And you keep making accusations of what we're doing, but it seems that you don't even understand the Grim Reaper paradox, because if you did, then you would at least be able to attempt to try to provide an analogy or an analogous argument and apply it to our conception of God. But you're not doing it. And frankly, you're wasting time because we've given you several times to do so.
Okay, sir. So my argument now is, I say that radical consciousness is insanity. It's not consciousness. In other words, consciousness that doesn't apply to some kind of linear time environment, it's insanity. Can you imagine having consciousness that doesn't apply to time and causality? It's insanity. First I act, then I decide. I want to say one word, but I think another word. So consciousness doesn't make sense in a non-causality environment, in a non-time environment. Yet God is...
But Socrates, sorry, 1 second. So the two things here. First of all, you're assuming in your argument, obviously, that the realm, of God's existence doesn't have any notion of causality or time. That's the first assumption, and you have to ask us first whether we accept that. The second thing is you're just stating that it doesn't make sense, but you're not giving reasons. I mean, you're explain. What?
Can radical consciousness exist?
What do you mean?
What does radical consciousness even mean? What are you talking about?
Radical consciousness means that it's a kind of consciousness that is not time in a linear time environment. So, in my concern, in my estimation, consciousness doesn't make sense without an environment, and especially an environment with as we have in our universe. With time.
What do you mean by environment? Do you mean
you're saying God cannot be conscious unless there are other things beside Himself?
No, what I'm saying is that let me give you because I'm trying to formulate. I know I have a problem in formulating my arguments in a way, but let me
Yeah, we
make
can
a
see that.
contrast.
Trust me.
Yes. Well, let me make a contrast. For example, is a quantum environment, for example, there are some kind of qualities that go around, let's say, time limitations. So time can be there is some kind of radical time. Future and past might coexist, and all this kind of stuff. So when it comes, if the necessary being is some kind of quantum environment, let's say, then there is a potential to go around all these classical limitations, like infinite regress, like time being, radical and all this kind of stuff. But when it comes to consciousness, in my estimation, it only makes sense in a universe where time is, as we experience time in our universe. What I'm doing, in other words, guys, is I'm applying the same arguments you apply to the universe. I'm applying the same arguments, and I'm comparing the probabilities. And I say, okay.
No, you're actually not, Socrates. You're actually not. You're claiming that you're applying the same argument, but you have failed to apply the Grim Reaper paradox about 5 times over again to our conception of God. And honestly, if the other mods are okay with it, I'm willing to move on because we've given you several attempts and you failed to do so. You keep repeating yourself that you are applying probabilities and examining God and you're applying the same reasoning. You're not. I honestly don't think that you even know what the Grim Reaper paradox actually is.
Yeah, I'll tell you
So
what,
if you do, why don't you explain us to, how about this? In order to make an analogy between two things, you have to have an understanding of what they are. So why don't you explain to me and the audience in the simplest terms what exactly the Grim Reaper paradox is, what it's attempting to demonstrate, and then attempt to apply it to God.
So the Grim Reaper paradox is that there is a, okay, I can, so there is a Grim Reaper, there is a Reaper, so there is a set time that someone will die. And there are, but there is, in this time there is one Reaper. In a further time there is another Reaper, and in a further time there is another Reaper. So what that paradox shows is that if we have infinite Reapers, that means that no Reaper is responsible for the death of the person. So that is a contradiction. Yet a Reaper killed this person, although if there are infinite Reapers, that means that no Reaper killed this person. So it's a kind of infinite regress argument that try to demonstrate the need for a necessary being to stop this infinite regress of.
I mean,
no,
right
not
so
necessarily.
Far,
you were right until
being.
Yeah, you were right until the end. No, it's not merely an attempt to demonstrate a necessary being. In fact, you can affirm the Grim Reaper paradox as a good argument and affirm causal finitism and be an atheist or naturalist. It has absolutely nothing to do necessarily in and of itself with demonstrating that a necessary being exists, although it could have implications within specific arguments.
Yes, I know. It doesn't necessitate. Of course, there can be other arguments, like, for example, infinities exist, real infinities exist in reality, and all this kind of stuff. But yes, what I'm trying to say is that they use this argument to imply the necessary, to be as evidence for the necessary being. Is that right? I know there are
not on its own, but it's part of a greater argument. You're taking it out of context. Now, anyway, that's beside the point. Now that you've somewhat understood what the argument is attempting to demonstrate, can you show in a similar way that the argument of the Grim Reaper paradox can be fashioned in such a way to apply to an eternal conscious being such as God? We're waiting for you to do that. I haven't seen you provide a super task or anything to demonstrate a contradiction in the actual argument. You haven't done
Yes,
that yet, so
there
we're
is no
waiting.
yes, sir. There is no contradiction because you define your God as you saying that God is infinite and God is as the Quran describes. That doesn't is irrelevant. So what I'm trying to say is that you cannot apply your theological definitions to solve arguments. So what I am doing, being
So you're
more-
saying you're not doing an internal critique then?
Sir, this is exactly what I'm saying. This is exactly my point. My point
You're
is
not doing an internal critique. We agree.
so now my question to you, sir, is please explain how God breaks this paradox without applying your theological definitions. Give me real reasons why. What is
No, we're not going to do that. We're waiting for you
okay,
to
so
give
you
us
are
the
applying
reasons. We're waiting for you to back up your claim because you made a claim. But I think it's clear to me.
The special pleading logical fallacy, and you just demonstrated that. You just
Listen, Socrates, I know just because you're Greek, you think you know philosophy and you're Socrates' son. But the honest reality is you completely face planted here and you look really stupid, my friend, because we've given you numerous times over and over again to demonstrate an analogy between the causal finitism argument of the Grim Reaper paradox and apply it to God, and you haven't been able to do so. All you've been able to do is make the charge of special pleading without a demonstration of such. So again, still at this point, you're wasting our time. But you know what? Keep going. Let's see how far this goes. Keep going.
Yes, of course. Of course, I don't believe God breaks this paradox. So obviously, I won't give reasons how God breaks this paradox. I can give some reasons how, and I will in fact demonstrate now how a quantum environment or the simplest fundamental form is in fact the necessary being. And my argument will be.
So you're moving to a different argument. You're moving to a different point because you're not. No. I want you to actually substantiate the claim that you've made because you made a very bold claim, but you have not been able to substantiate it. And now you're trying to move on to a different point because you're unable to substantiate your claim. We're not doing that.
You want me to prove God, sir? But because
No. You're saying, how does God break the paradox? God doesn't break the paradox. The paradox is irrelevant to the question of God. As I said, we can believe in causal finitism for good reasons based on the argument apart from God existing. Now, if we add God into the mix, you need to show that there's some type of inconsistency with the belief in an eternal God and the argument of the Grim Reaper paradox. You have not shown how there's an inconsistency.
There is no inconsistency. Okay, let me.
Okay, there is no inconsistency. That's the point, which you made the claim that there was.
But let me continue. There is no inconsistency if you apply your theological definitions, which are irrelevant. I don't know.
How is it irrelevant? How is it irrelevant?
Because
you made the claim. You made the claim that God's existence actually is in conflict with the Grim Reaper paradox. You have not been able to show that.
Because that.
So one second, sorry, Socrates. So are you saying that you think that the standards that we apply to the universe or the cosmos should be applied to this entity that's called God, but then when we ask what God is, right, in order to sort of understand the nature and see whether these standards are applicable, you say that doesn't matter. So there's just some label in your mind, some just abstract notion of what it is to be God, and you don't want to go into any detail about the metaphysics of what that is, what it implies, and all that stuff in order to see whether your objection applies. It's not a serious objection then. You're just, in order to know whether it's a special pleading fallacy, we need to deconstruct the concept of God and what we mean by it. But you're saying leave theology out of it. I mean, the philosophical understanding of what God is, I mean, it's relevant to the objection you're raising. I don't see how you want to just put that aside.
So,
is there something about the way the word God sounds that
Yes,
makes it
because
just automatically. I mean,
I understand your point, and you made a good point, because and now you say that we can have some kind of epistemical, to weight epistemical value. For example, you can give other arguments for the existence of God, and therefore say that God exists with this kind of properties, and therefore, for other reasons, and now that God exists, therefore now I can apply this definition of God to the contingency argument. But now you are broadening the scope, so I can.
okay, but look, if we stick to then don't. If you don't want to go to God, don't go to God. But if you're gonna go to God, then we reach there somehow. Maybe it's from within the argument, the contingency argument. We made a stage 2, and made some kind of inference to God, and then we spoke about God's nature. Those discussions are going to be important to know whether or not we're doing a special pleading fallacy. But if you're saying no, you have to go to other considerations, and you don't want to touch on those, then you're not talking. You're just talking about a stage 1 cosmological argument. You're talking about causal finitism.
Course,
I mean,
you made a fair argument.
Yeah.
You made a fair argument.
No, Socrates, listen, I'm going to make it simple. What you're basically saying is, I want to bring an objection to God and your belief in God, but I don't want to discuss theology. That's basically what you're saying. And the reality is, when you're talking about God, you are, and if you want to actually take our belief system seriously and do an internal critique, then you would take what we believe about God seriously. Otherwise, you're not actually doing an internal critique, and you're wanting to talk about God without wanting to talk about it. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
Just like Abdul Rahman said, so I could just use the word God, and it can refer to anything I want, and I don't need to provide any description of it or my understanding of who God is. That's just ridiculous.
That is a fair point.
Utterly
Which
ridiculous.
I acknowledge that. That is a fair point. So I acknowledge that. What you are saying now is a fair point. So in other words, there can be other, and you obviously have these arguments, and you investigate these arguments. There can be other arguments that substantiate this definition of God, and then you apply to the contingency argument. So I accept this point, which is true. So obviously, I don't accept the other reasons you believe that there is a God, personally, and I think I can make a better argument why the inevitable essence, initial essence, must be something simple. For example, the simplest fundamental form. And how do I do that? I say that the philosophical nothing never existed, simply because philosophers define that nothing in that way. So philosophers say, from nothing, nothing comes. We have something, therefore that nothing never existed. So I accept something always existed. But now I'm thinking, if you take out the nothing as the always existed, what is the next inevitable thing? The simplest fundamental form, isn't that right? Because if you take out the nothing, what is the next thing that is inevitable? It must
Nothing
be some
comes
kind
from
of
nothing.
environment. Some simple thing. The simplest fundamental form.
No.
Yeah, okay. Socrates, we get your point. So now you're admitting that your initial objection was misplaced, and you're moving on to, because of what we've actually said, to a discussion on the first part of the argument, in which now you want to analyze whether or not the necessary being can be something else. You've mentioned that something always existed, but that's really not dealing with the contingency argument. We can even grant you, for the sake of argument, that materiality has always existed. The question is whether or not you attribute a necessary being in reality, and if so, then what is it? So we don't care about eternality. We want to know about necessity versus contingency.
Yes, so I accept the need for a necessary being, and I say that this necessary being must be the simplest fundamental form, some kind, obviously I don't know what that is, but some kind of physical form, okay, so, like a quantum environment, let's say, that is dynamic and evolved to everything else. So there are two competing things that we need to investigate, which fits better to the necessary being. In one hand, we have God that has some good things that favor this probability, but we also need to investigate a physical reality being the necessary being, and then weight the probabilities.
But sorry, but Socrates, just a question about. So let's start with the first point. So you're saying it must be something simple. Can you please just define what you mean by simple and tell us why it must be? As in, are you making is this a logical necessity, like some kind of metaphysical necessity? Is there an argument for that if it is a logical necessity? Or is it based on some sort of metaphysical principle? Because you talked about fundamentality and stuff like that. Based on what metaphysical considerations is this necessary? That's not clear. You either provide an argument for why it's logically necessary, or maybe give us a certain metaphysic that relies on, and also firstly explain what you mean by simple.
The first time I've heard the contingency argument, my objection was with the word necessary. The contingency argument, as I understand it, implies that necessity is something like necessary to explain what we see. Isn't that right? But in my estimation,
no, but that's not what it means. It can mean that. So I don't want to be it can. If that's what you mean by necessary, that's fine. But normally, the way it's used today, necessary is basically a modal term that's used in terms of the developments that we have in modal logic and stuff. So you talk about in terms of possible world semantics. Something necessary is something that exists in all possible worlds. Something contingent is something that exists in not all possible worlds, like some or most of them. What?
So
sorry.
Yes, because that is my kind of objection. Because necessary to explain what we see is we apply in the argument what we see now, and we apply it. Anyway, that was my objection.
Okay, yeah. No. I understand what you're saying. So let me try to be charitable and just accept your understanding of necessity. You're saying the way you're using necessary is that there's something in terms some kind of causal necessity, in the sense that we have this data and something necessarily explains it. So it's not some kind of metaphysical necessity. It's more of a nomological necessity, as in according to the laws of nature. Okay, so you're talking about nomological necessity. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like a brute fact. I think of necessity like a brute fact. In other words, it was necessary there because it's a brute fact. But what I've noticed, some theists, I'm not saying you, sir, but some theists make some kind of switch of hand. And in one sense, they apply necessary as a brute fact. And in another sense, they apply necessary to explain to what we see today. So when I use the word necessary, I apply the word as a brute fact. So I then make the logical.
So for you, those fundamental simples, right? They are brute facts, right?
Yeah, necessity.
Yeah, but the question is, what's the difference between how you're using necessary and necessity versus a brute contingency? What's the difference?
Yes, the brute contingency. Okay, that's a good point. So, brute contingency. Yeah, I need to think about that. What is this difference?
Yeah, that's fundamental, because you're saying it's necessary, but you haven't given a definition that clearly can distinguish between the necessity and the way that you're explaining it and what would typically be called a brute contingency.
Yes. So the initial essence, so the key word is the initial. So what, because maybe everything is a brute, if we have some kind of, let's say, determinism, everything might be contingent. Okay, so you can call everything a brute fact, but I'm referring to the initial essence. In other words, to the brute fact that then evolved or gave birth to other things. So this is how I make the distinction.
But would you consider yourself contingent or necessary?
Yes, even that. Okay, obviously, I consider myself contingent in order to further the discussion. But even that can be contended. If we say that there is some kind of determinism, then maybe even I couldn't have been. You understand what I'm saying, sir? If we assume a determinist world, then even I am a brute fact in a sense. But let's not complicate matters more. I would say, sir, to be honest and to go further with the conversation, that I consider myself a contingent being.
No, we don't want to just go further for the sake of discussion. We want to know your honest opinion. Do you consider yourself contingent or necessary?
Contingent.
Why?
Because there was a brute fact, which I call the necessary existence, that gave birth to other things, and eventually I became.
So is there any possibility in which you don't exist, or you wouldn't exist? Is that possible?
Yes, but even that, the possibility in the minds, yes, it is a possibility inside the mind, but that doesn't mean the possibility inside the mind is a factual possibility in the real world.
So in reality, do you think there's no possibility that you don't exist?
Yes, I believe that. I believe that. Yes, in reality, I believe that.
Okay, so then you believe in philosophical terminology that you are a necessary being, and so is everything else, based on determinism, correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So that again, I'm sorry to say, Socrates, but this shows that you don't really understand the categories of necessary and contingent, because there's nothing about determinism that necessitates that everything in the chain is necessary. You can understand that one entails the other, but they can all be contingent things that entail the other thing that comes next in the chain, and the entire chain and each individual part can be considered contingent. So simply assuming you're conflating determinism with necessity, which is a rookie mistake.
Sir, with all due respect, isn't that exactly?
Yeah. So let me try to clear it up for you, Socrates, and give you my understanding of your view. Right. So I think you are conflating terms. I don't think you're familiar with with contingency arguments, at least as they're used in contemporary analytic philosophy. But what you mean by these terms, right? This is the view that I think you have. I think you have a view. First of all, obviously, you're a determinist. I'm not sure if you're a causal finitist, depending on. Well, what you said about fundamentality depends on what kind of fundamentality you're talking about. But you believe that in modern terminology, mostly as most philosophers would use it, you're necessary in a modal sense, but you're dependent. So you're dependent on antecedent states. And if you're a causal finitist, then there is a first state. That state is not dependent on anything else. It's just a brute fact. That seems to be your view. And tell me if I'm wrong. So is that clear enough?
Can you repeat the last part, please?
So you're dependent on antecedent states, and there is a first state that is a brute fact.
Exactly. Yes, this is what I said. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that first state, do you mean like that kind of fundamentality? Are you talking is it first temporally in terms of time? Or are you talking in terms of maybe some other relation like grounding or something? Is it in the past, so there's a first moment of time or something?
Yes, in the current universe. But also I make the distinction of because whether there is a possibility in our mind, okay, so whether we can conceptualize something else happening in our mind, that doesn't mean this possibility that exists in our conceptions can exist in the real world. So you're an Aristotelian about modality, So
yes, you're basically So look, this is something else that Nisi pointed out earlier. It's a bit strange. So that was part of the confusion is that you started critiquing the contingency argument, and as for most formulations, the Grim Reaper paradox isn't really relevant in that sense. I think it's more relevant to a Kalam cosmological argument. Although it may be relevant, but then because Kalam cosmological arguments, so contingency arguments are more about explanation, and the concept of explanation can be broader than causality. And when you're talking about causal affinitism, you're talking about causality. So it's strange that I'm critiquing the contingency argument, but then you went straight to a premise that's, I think, mostly used in defense of a Kalam cosmological argument. So there's too much mix up here. But I think, okay, so within the Kalam, you basically accept the stage one Kalam cosmological argument. You'd accept that there is a first cause that is uncaused, and it only extends finitely in the past. Obviously, if it's first, then that's just by definition, right? Okay, so it's not. So just to be clear, it's just 1 hour later, it hasn't been a contingency argument that was being critiqued. It's more of a Kalam cosmological argument, and it's like you're accepting the stage one. You're just saying you have a problem with this stage two. Now, can you tell us why you have a problem with a stage two? Okay, so the first cause for you is not God because you said it must be a simple. Now, this is one of the things you mentioned that I want to understand. What do you mean by it must be a simple? Based on what? Is it based on a metaphysical principle or some kind of logical necessity, or what exactly? In what sense must it be simple? And also, I still don't understand exactly what you mean by simple.
Because the same way we all agree, and you say very fairly, you say fairly, sir, that something cannot come from nothing. Isn't that what you say, sir?
Yeah, but I'm wondering how that doesn't apply to you when you believe that there was a true beginning of time. And so where did the initial state come from?
The time began with our current universe. So that's another conversation.
No, it's directly related to what you just said, because you're positing the beginning to things that exist. And the question is, well, if you believe in causal finitism, then where does the initial item come from if it's not eternal?
It is eternal. This is what I said. That I accept the need for a necessary being that is eternal. It is inevitably there and could not have been any other way.
Okay, so it's eternal. And how do you rule out the infinite causal series?
The infinite causal, because it's a brute fact. It's a brute fact, and like infinite causal series. So it's some kind of dynamic environment, let's say, that gives birth. You mean how it gives birth infinitely? It gives birth to things infinitely. So this is how I go around this.
You believe that the initial state gives birth to things infinitely?
Yes.
Okay, so if it gives birth to things infinitely, then it seems like you have an infinite amount of causes and effects, in which case you're not really affirming causal finitism, you're affirming causal infinitism.
Infinitism. Causal, yes. Finite. Yes, but this is, I see what you say now, but that also applies to God, first of all, because God is our consciousness, and I don't see how God goes around this problem. But
Socrates, I'm confused. So
no, we're trying to understand you. No, hold on, Socrates, listen.
Yes.
My friend, at this point, we're trying to understand your view and what you're even saying. That's what we're trying to do. And what I'm pointing out here is that you're contradicting yourself, because up until now, you've said that you affirmed causal finitism. That means that the amount of causes and effects in the series are finite. But now you're saying that the initial item has infinitely caused many things. And so the idea is that you're actually contradicting yourself, because you can't say that the initial state is infinitely causing and then at the same time say that you believe in causal finitism.
Yes, but it doesn't go back in time. Okay, so it's one thing that is causing. It's not something that caused this thing. So it's one thing eternal that is causing. So that is the difference. Can you understand? So
yeah, you're saying it's one thing, but just because it's one thing, how are you saying that then leads to causal finitism?
Because it's one thing that causes. Okay, so the same way as God is always existed, but He decides to cause something without. It's something that causes without consciousness. That's the only difference.
Okay, how about this, Socrates? Can you explain to us your understanding of causal finitism? Then maybe we can understand you.
Causal finitism. That there is some start to an infinite regress. Isn't that what that means?
No, there is no infinite regress of causal.
So it's not stuck in definitions. What I'm trying to
Oh, we don't know what you believe at this point. We don't understand what you're saying.
Yes, what I'm saying is that something always existed, but this something was not conscious. The only difference with I assume an uncaused mover, unmoved mover, but this unmoved mover is not conscious. So, and this is what I'm saying in other words.
Yeah, the unmoved mover is not conscious. I get that. You believe it's something material, that is simple, that is not conscious. We get that. But the question we have for you is whether or not you affirm causal finitism. It seemed like you said yes before, but now it seems like you're saying no. So that's why we're confused.
Yes, but that's just a definition of some term. Maybe I misunderstand the term. Let me define. So I'm just describing what I believe in simple words. Maybe I made that term wrong. I don't know. So if I did so, I apologize. So what I'm trying to say is,
Abdul Rahman, maybe you can understand them better and then explain it, because I don't understand what he's saying.
So Socrates basically is of the view that if you have a first cause that infinitely creates, and all chains of creation just go back to that one cause, then he's affirming a causal finicist view, maybe. But I think it's similar to the Timean perpetual creation thing. The real question is whether you can run a sort of Grim Reaper's paradox on that kind of view, because it seems like there's time. This thing is temporal, right? And it seems like both time extends infinitely into the past. And if that's the case, then can you apply one of the paradoxes, one of Kuhn's versions of the Ben-Betti paradoxes to the infinite past in the case of this?
Yeah, why couldn't you have an infinite amount of angels or something like that and try to do it that way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems like Socrates, the most confusing part for me is that it seems like this was an objection you were raising about our understanding of God, which we're rejecting until now. And it seems like when you put your view forward, strangely enough, the objection you're raising, it applies to you, not to us. I don't... Sorry?
Yes, but I don't understand that. In the long term, we have two competing. So I gave a hypothesis. Okay, so we don't know what is the truth. So there are some
before you go to competing hypotheses. Right now we're talking about your view, right? So then we can go to competing hypotheses.
Yes, but this is not that is a criticism in this kind of discourse, because we get lost in definitions and we are losing the essence. So everything we can talk about every word for eternity, every word. But we are losing the essence. So in essence, we have two competing hypotheses. In one hand, we have, let's say, the simplest fundamental form that evolved to everything else. This hypothesis has certain things going for it. For example, it assumes that simple evolves to complicated. it assumes we can easily imagine that being inevitable, but it has some negative things. The one very well, the Muslim metaphysician told me, but wait just a moment. If that essence makes universes all the time, then that doesn't, in a sense, go around the infinite recurrence. So there is some negative things of my hypothesis. On the other hand, we have the
so look, what you can have on causal finitism is that
that's all the essence.
Okay,
go ahead.
On the other hand, sir,
continue.
on the other hand, sir, we have the God hypothesis, which has certain good going for it. For example, he can choose to make a universe. He's all powerful. He has the ability, without evolution, to make the universe. Okay, but there are some things that going negatively to this hypothesis. Like, for example, how can God, when he is so complicated, is inevitable there, just exist for eternity? How that makes sense? How that makes sense that he's so complex?
I mean, but now we're jumping elsewhere, and you're gonna have to give us
Socrates, let me ask you a simple question. Do you think that people, meaning you and I in this case, that we can do a comparative analysis of views if we don't understand what each other's view actually is?
No, of course not. But I have tried.
So that's why we're doing the hard work now of asking you questions to try to understand what your view actually is. We can't do a comparative analysis between your view and ours if we don't understand what your view actually is. You get what I'm saying?
Of course. So my view, let me try.
Yeah. So Socrates, look on causal finitism. Let me tell you what it doesn't necessitate. It doesn't necessitate that the past is finite, because what some people say is that, well, you can have an infinite number of finite causal chains. Okay, but then I think, but what you're saying, and whether or not the paradoxes would apply to your hypothesis, it depends on your model, like time, as in. So is this one cause basically causally linked between these different events? So is there one causal chain of like causing something and then causal something and then causing something, with those different points in time being causally linked? I mean, there's just going to be questions about that. But I think the most strange thing is that yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you said, sir, and which is a very fair criticism. And in fact, although in the beginning I thought that it's not so much of a problem, then when I start thinking of it a couple of days ago, I start realizing that when something makes things all the time, so that is not something very, maybe that applies to infinite regress. Okay, so I accept that, but how I try to go around this problem is imagining some kind of counterintuitive reality, because the origins, it must have been in the quantum level. So there might have been some kind of quantum time, but I know using now quantum mechanics is something that is like you won't like that. You won't like that because it goes away from philosophy and classical logic and all of this kind of stuff. And I don't want to apply to mystery or to ignorance or this kind of stuff, because nobody understands quantum mechanics. Although we have noticed this kind of counterintuitive things happening in the quantum level. And in fact, okay.
But Socrates, so that's okay. So let's just be clear now, right? That we're just moving on to this next point, right? So again, this critique that you're launching, that you tried to launch against our position of God, that didn't work because you weren't really understanding what our position of God is, and you need to understand the position in order to critique it. And then we moved to your position, and strangely enough, the critique that you were trying to use against our position actually straightforwardly seems to be applicable to your position, depending on certain, of course, nuances that might be clarified. And then, so we can put that aside, and right now, you're talking about simplicity, right? Fundamentality and stuff like that. Yes, so maybe now you can ask my question about the metaphysical. Sorry?
Yes, but what was my initial criticism about the special pleading? So now, what I feel, I'm not saying that you're.
Yeah, but look.
Yes, but wait
Look.
just a
The
moment,
special
sir,
pleading
because
here
what
is
I feel
this:
now
is that
is
look, if you're a causal finitist, look. Let me just be clear about the initial criticism: is that if you apply something to like the cosmos, like a certain principle to the cosmos, you accept a finitist solution based on like these some of these paradoxes and other considerations. And then you appeal to this fundamental layer of reality that's simple as an initial cause, and you have something within that reality that should be subject to the same kind of criticism that led you to causal finitism, and you're not applying it for no reason. That would seem like special pleading, and that's what you seem to be doing, not us, because you haven't even assessed our concept of God, right? So that's what you seem to be doing. So, so that's exactly what I'm saying. The initial claim, the initial charge of special pleading seems to be applicable to you right now, not to us.
What I'm saying, sir, is that now, look now what is happening. I need to prove all the mysteries of the universe, and you just have to say my definition says so. So can you understand?
No, who said that?
No, that's not what happened. You made a charge. You made a charge of special pleading. What Abdul Rahman is saying, not only have you failed to demonstrate how we are guilty of special pleading and draw an analogy to apply the argument of the Grim Reaper paradox to our conception of God, but when we actually remove the hijab, so to speak, from you, we find out that your actual initial criticism can be applied against your own view, and you have no answer to it. So the irony is just quite astonishing.
Okay, let me respond. Let me respond to that. What are the first things that we seek, we identify in the necessary being? What are those things?
Well played.
Is this being one? No. Is this being conscious? No. The first things we identify in the necessary being is it couldn't have been any other way, always existed, and it caused everything else. Okay, so my direct question to you, which I said in the beginning, was, could Allah have been any other way? This was mine. And you said the only reason you gave is that we have other reasons to believe that Allah is true, and therefore we accept the theological.
No, that wasn't my answer. You weren't listening. The replays
No, you're
are
going
on.
way off.
You can rewind
Socrates.
later. Yeah.
You're going way off that topic, my friend. Your summary of the conversation is so bad it's not even funny. I really suggest
YouTube material.
Yeah, this is YouTube material. Socrates, I suggest that you go and actually listen to the replays and then listen to the summary that you just gave of the discussion and witness how terrible of a summary it actually is. And then listen to my summary and Abdul Rahman's summary of the conversation and see how accurate it is. It shows that you're not really paying attention in the discussion.
Of course I did, sir. It's okay. You made a challenge. Okay, we can see that. But my initial, so we are moving from the essence. Okay, so my direct question is: you apply.
No, but before you move on, Socrates, because you said that you asked a question and it wasn't answered. All we said was, "Oh, we have other reasons," but that's really not what happened. And I'm gonna remind you, because you said that thing about, "Oh, well, could we conceive of God otherwise?" 1 second. Could we conceive of God otherwise? Yes, then, well, the same criticism should apply. And I answered that. I said, well, you must be thinking of it this way, as in, like, just conceptually, logically speaking, you could think of ordering something in different ways or describing it in different ways, therefore it's contingent. If you hold to that principle, then yes, it should be applicable to God, because just like I can define God in a different way conceptually, there's no contradiction. But then I said that we don't hold to that view. That's not our understanding. That's not how we identify whether something's contingent or not. When we say it could have been otherwise, I explained to you that that's described in modal terms, in the sense that it's not true in every possible world. Something necessary is true in every possible world. Now, there are going to be metaphysical considerations for that standard that you apply in determining
what is necessary, as in exists in all possible worlds or is true in all possible worlds, and something that is contingent, which is basically true in some but not all possible worlds. Now that was my answer. I didn't say, oh no, we have other reasons. So
yes, but this possibility, wait, sir, you apply these possibilities in your conceptions. You can just because
that's a different objection. Right now that's the response you should have given me then. I'm just pointing out that what you just said about what the answer was is inaccurate. Your question was addressed, and then you didn't respond. You moved on to a different point.
Okay, let me respond, sir. Again, you are demonstrating this kind of special pleading because now you are saying possible. I can conceptualize possible worlds. The contingency argument refers to reality.
He gave you a response. And then instead of you giving your objection to his response, you move to a separate point.
Socrates, again, just so you don't go on a long tangent. Please. No, I didn't say that. I did not say. No, because right now you're going to critique my conceivability. I didn't even commit to conceivability. I just explained to you what the principle is, and you're saying just because you can imagine it doesn't mean it's true. I didn't say just because I can imagine it's true. I never said that. I explained to you. What?
All possible worlds. How you know the?
I didn't say anything about knowing it or not knowing it. I didn't commit to a specific modal theory. I was explaining to you how these terms are defined to remove that confusion about what you think about this just could have been otherwise thing that's just caricatured most of the time. So you moving from there and saying, oh, but how do you know whether something exists in all possible worlds based on conceivability? When I didn't tell you that's what I based it on, is you're replying to somebody else in a different discussion.
Yes, sir. But what I've noticed here is that we are getting lost in us. I'm not saying that's not useful, but we are getting lost in this kind of philosophical, very broad philosophical discussions, and we are losing the essence. So my direct question remains: if we want to really investigate what is more probable to be the inevitable, the necessary being. So I ask, you formulate an argument and you say, the inevitable thing could not have been any other way. Okay, could Allah have been any other way? Because Allah has specific.
Is that a question you asked me, and was that the answer I gave you?
My direct
no. But was that? One second. Who are you responding to? Because was that an answer I gave you?
I'm responding to the contingency argument. This is the contingency.
No. There's
No, Socrates. We're trying to, first of all, we're doing a comparative analysis of views after you failed miserably to demonstrate how the Grim Reaper paradox can actually apply to our view. Then we were trying to understand your view. We found out that the very objection you were saying that we were guilty of not applying to our model, you were guilty of not applying to your own model. And so you were the one that was actually guilty of special pleading. Now we're trying to do a summary of what the conversation is and see how easy I was able to do it in about 20 seconds. You're rambling on, and now you're moving on to a different point that we never stated, and that was irrelevant to the actual discussion. So again, sir, I don't know. Do you think? Let me ask you a serious question. Do you think there's a language barrier or communication problem happening?
Wait a moment, sir. Because now you are making Now you are making sophistry, sir.
No, I'm not. You are, sir. What's happening is you're making a dead man named Socrates look really bad. You're crapping on his name. That's what you're doing.
Okay. Aside the ad hominem, you said something, sir. What did I say about the? You said I said that you are
Socrates. You ever heard the saying "quit while you're ahead"? Quit while you're not ahead, my friend. It's like it's been like a triple KO, and you're still trying to figure out what's going on.
Yes, your ad hominem plays no role in this.
It plays a big role. It plays a big role to anybody who's going to listen to this recording because you look very silly, my friend.
No, sir, because only dumb people will hear these ad hominems and think that you.
No, only any honest person listening to this recording will say, wow, I should never listen to Socrates' son again because he's probably an illegitimate child of poor Socrates.
Okay, sir, moral hominins. You misrepresented what I said, because what I clearly said is that I don't accept your theological definitions in the argument. So you missed that when you.
So it's not an internal critique.
Wait, can we?
Okay,
Wait, is Abdul Rahman there?
Just because. Anyway, so we are going in.
I'm here.
And okay, anyway, I don't know how else can I.
Okay, thank you, Socrates. So maybe you could just, I guess, gather your thoughts. Maybe there was a bit of a language barrier. Try to gather your thoughts, and maybe next time you can present it in a way we can understand it better.
I appreciate
Thank
this
you.
discussion, and I take in heart your criticism, and I listen and contemplate what you're saying. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, enjoy yourself, Socrates.
Thank you.